te karakia. E noho tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, maudiora. Tēnā tātou. No mai hoki mai huhui mai nei I tō tātou nei hui o te Kōrau Tūāpapa, tuatahi kei te mihi ki ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohe, ngā te toa te atiawa o te rā taranaki whānui hoki, tēnā koutou katoa. So morning everybody, we are going to kick straight into this. So we have done our karakia. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, apology for possible early departure because there's an opening of a cycleway between Petone and Naronga. Well, not opening, but a starting of construction.
Oh, ka pai, yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I have to go to that same thing, so.
Cool,
Yep.
all right.
Digging sod.
Cool. Te ara tupua, nice. All right, fair enough. Anybody else? Okay, I move that we accept these apologies. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Matthews. Ka pai. And Councillor Panovich is online with us today. Oh, there we go. Yep, it worked. Ka pai. Cool. And then I call on any members who might have a conflict of interest in this meeting to declare that now. Cool. Confirmation of minutes. So I move that we accept the minutes from the previous meeting. Anyone want to second that? Councillor McNulty, thank you. Let's put that to the vote. Oh. Oh, sorry, just having some remote issues, but it's all good, it's all good. Sweet. Okay, awesome, carried. There are no items not on the agenda, and we're going to kick straight into public participation. So, no my Tim Foote, welcome. So you've got 5 minutes to talk to us this morning about the slips, and if you wanted to answer any questions, just leave time for that within your time. Kia ora.
Morena tātou, just me here first to the Chair, mana whenua, to the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councillors and the officers here today, and particularly to Laurie, who, after we reached out, invited me to speak today. So my name's Tim Foote, so I'm a citizen. I have some expertise in community development. I've worked with council in the past, and I really do believe in council's role as a kaitiaki of our city. I live at 54 Liardet Street, Vogeltown, with my partner Sam, our 3-year-old, and a couple of guinea pigs. And I'm here to just briefly share the story of the couple of slips that we've had at our property the last year, the impact on us, and then share some thoughts on how City Council could support people in a similar situation, just thinking broadly about the situation for others. So you'll see up on the board, so that's our property. So the first slip was at the back of the property. Slip 2 you can see on the left, and the second slip was on slip 1 on the front of the property, which also crossed onto road reserve. So first slip happened on 20th of February 2022 as an impact of Cyclone Dovie. Came down behind the house like a freight train. I was home and it just, yeah, it was quite shocking. There's an 8-metre high bank behind our house that was cut in the 30s probably. The second slip happened in the middle of one of those intense rain events that's in your notes on the 12th of June 2022. Again, I heard this and it was like, I don't know, like a tram hitting the hill. It was quite intense. And about 2 months later, with the continued rain, we had engaged engineers and begun works, but then the hill began to crack. The deck at our front of our house started to move. And as you'd imagine, we had to cover it up for the next 6 months. This is what our house looks like now, with a lot of rebar and, a lot of work's undergoing. So as you can see on these plans, not a cheap piece of work for us. So our situation is that things are, as you'd imagine, pretty tight. They could be a lot worse. As we've all seen in Hawke's Bay, things are a lot worse than this, but things are pretty tough. EQC gave us $98,000 of support, and our insurance total, the cost of the repairs is $298,000. So there's a $200,000 gap for us to cover. So we've hit the ceiling of what the bank will loan us. Our parents have thankfully stepped in to help us bridge the gap, but we're well into negative equity now. So because the lower slip slid onto City Council land and we didn't have an easement on the footpath, that meant that EQC didn't pay out an extra 50 or 60 grand that we would have got because it wasn't technically our land. So we missed quite a lot of payment because of that. Technicalities. Sorry, I'll leave that up. So the impact on us, it was a pretty hard year last year. Personally, I can speak to feeling really anxious. The stuff you hear about when it rains, being very real, particularly when cracks started to appear in the hill below our house. When, in August, seeing the deck starting to move, I just remember that feeling of, I don't know if it was adrenaline, but yeah, a lot. I've had to change my work, so I was self-employed doing community development work. I'm now working for MSD, which is great, but wouldn't have chosen to make that change otherwise. And obviously our property is less safe for our little person to play outside, which kind of sucks. Works are underway. They'll be fixed in 6 weeks. It's been undergoing for about 6 weeks. So City Council has been a great support throughout. You were one of our first points of call. I remember calling and saying, what support can we get? The person saying, not much, talk to your insurer, talk to engineers, and they were right. But there's been other points. So when we tried to find out about what emergency work status, which we have been granted, thankfully by your consents team, when I tried to find out what that meant, no information on the website. I had to go through my engineer's contact to find the manager of the consents team, and I'm pretty privileged, so I'm comfortable having that conversation. But and he was amazing, but a lot of people wouldn't be comfortable having that conversation, understanding the process. It still wasn't entirely clear, to be honest, but really helpful. What City Council could do differently, I think just making the unknown known for us, even providing more information around what City Council can do or can't do in situations like this, who we need to talk to. This is going to be happening to thousands of people over the next few years. And if you've got thousands of anxious residents experiencing what I've experienced, that's not good. That's not good for our city and for them. I think creating a mechanism for residents to be able to ask questions and prevent this, if we'd known that we needed to fix these 2 retaining walls that were getting a bit old, we would have. Yes, $100,000 would have felt like a kick in the face, but it's better than 300. It would be a small investment for city councils to say invest in a climate change information service, something like a small team of people that could be available to then provide information to people who are current property owners, not just people who are getting new limbs for the properties they're purchasing. And then finally, financial support for people in a situation like this, because even though, yes, we've got some support from parents and so on, we're fortunate that an extra 10 grand on consent fees, if that was to be waived, would make a huge difference. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Tim. Does anybody call Councillor Bennett?
Thank you so much for sharing that, and I think it's valuable information. Just wondering, how long do you think it will take for you to get back to a better financial position? Like how many years?
I have no idea. Sorry, Iona. I think we're well over the current value of the property now in terms of our loans. So I don't know, a decade. Who knows? Yeah.
And would you sort of say to other people wanting to buy a home, would you say, well, look, this is where you would buy again? Would you do it again?
I definitely wouldn't buy with the 8-metre cut behind my house again, and a slope that's 45 degrees below my house. But I didn't know that was an issue, and if I had someone that was providing that advice in advance that said, look for these things on your property and seeks advice. I know that would be legally complicated for council, but if there was a way to provide whatever information you do have, that would be really helpful. I certainly would have asked for that information. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tim. We've come to the end of the time now, but we're going to move straight into our slip debate. So we'll be able to ask questions and you can hear those answers and stay in the gallery if you wish and listen to that. But thank you for sharing with us this morning. So now we're going to move on to major slip events, and I'm going to ask Siobhan Proctor to introduce the paper.
Cool, Morena councillors. So this is a noting paper. We generally experience between 800 to 900 slips a year. In 2022, we exceeded 1,500. Most of these happened in the 6-week period, July and August, which were the wettest on record. We do have a proactive program of building new retaining and renewing existing retaining walls, which is part of our standard asset management. We spend about $3.5 to $4 million a year on that, which buys us 7 to 8 walls. Of the 1,500 slips that have occurred, we've got 85 sites that need significant remediation. And Brad and his team, we've got Brad and Brian Russell here to answer questions, have looked at how we can best progress these. There isn't sufficient consultant or contracting resource in the market at present to actually do a lot of actual work on this in the next financial year. So the proposal is that we bring it back as part of our LTP, as part of our asset management plan for next year, and go from there. So we've got Brad, who's our transport manager, Brian Russell, who's our assets manager, and transport team here to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Siobhan. So we'll start with Councillor Free.
Thank you. I was very interested in the issue of the not being able to get EQC money because of the easement on the land rather than owning the land. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
I don't actually have an idea as to how EQC make their judgment calls and do their evaluation. I'm not 100% sure about that.
So this is a private property. So that's a private property issue that I don't think we can advise on.
Do we get? Are we entitled to EQC money if our land slips?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. And I realise that the transport, the infrastructure team are have more than enough on their plate. But I just wondered, and it's probably for you, Ms. Proctor, about from a broader organisation perspective, is there an opportunity to maybe relook at some of the resourcing maybe engineers from another part working on other stuff, people in the planning team or policy team working on some aspects that obviously there's some concerns around where does a private property owner finish, where does the council's role start, or in like easements, and I know there's some shared paths and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity to relook at moving some resources around, in particular from other areas?
Yeah, so there is a policy under development at the moment. So we currently have a policy, so that's under review. So I think that's coming back in May.
I think so, somewhere April or May.
Yeah. So that will then outline all of those separate responsibilities and how we respond. So we have got people working on that. In terms of moving other resource around to attend to the slips themselves, it's not so much an internal resourcing issue, it's an external resourcing issue. So there will be work underway in the 23-24 financial year to actually prepare and plan for remediation of these 85 slips and program them into our standard program. So that work will be underway, but it's really the external constraints that are causing the issues, and obviously that's been exacerbated by Cyclone Gabriel.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, even some of the projects that we may have commissioned external that are not directly related to this, whether we can have a rethink and say, should they be there, or is this more important to focus on as a city? So you may not be able to answer that at this stage.
No.
Thank you.
Councillor Pennant.
Big thanks for bringing this paper. I've been desperately wanting it from GNS for a while. So you would expect a homeowner to do a building inspection before they buy a home, but generally you wouldn't get an engineer in. Do you think now we should be advising people to get an engineer in to look at whatever kind of land, whether you're buying an apartment or a standalone house?
I think that through our policy review, one of the things that we'll be looking at is what sort of advice and guidance we can provide private property owners or purchasers without taking any liability on ourselves as a council. So we need to be very careful about what sort of advice and guidance we do provide, but we're looking into that as part of the policy review as to what the council currently doesn't provide that we could start providing advice on.
And we could put information like this on the limb? I mean, I really feel for this family. It's terrible.
There is some information on the limb, but with regards to risk profiling, I don't believe that we put anything like that onto the limb around risk profiling of potential slips.
Land information memorandum here. So obviously, this for me has big planning implications, and that's why we had a very bitter argument over this, but this was part of my reticence and why I don't believe developers should have free for all. So what are you, when you're looking at the policy review, what will that have implications for in terms of our district plan? Because I don't feel that a lot of our risks have been factored in properly.
It's hard to say at this point. The council has a few different policies that are actual policies, and then there's policies where around the council table decisions have been made, and that's been now the council's policy. But there isn't an actual policy document associated with it. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to pull all those policies together, look at our legislative obligations as a council, and start to unpick those things and understand where policy may be against legislation, or we've made some decisions in the past that we actually can't make. And so what you'll be getting is a review of all those policies as well as our legislative obligations, and pretty much a pathway forward in terms of what we think is the best way forward from a council position and policy.
Thank you, Councillor McNulty.
Kia ora, Brian. I'm wondering if you could share the information you did with us at the Tawa Community Board around the tender for the main road slip, the drainage works, what had happened with council and what the next steps were. It helped hammer home the severity of the situation to me.
Yeah, certainly. So, you know, we had obviously the slip on Main Road Tawa, and what we're finding in today's market is as Siobhan said before, is resource, and we're talking about external resources very tight. So we had a project that went out to tender, and essentially, you know, we got 0 people sort of apply or interested in the tender. So we have to look at a different mechanism going forward, and I guess that's the thing. We're in a very changing market. You know, we've got climate change, we've got impacts right throughout New Zealand, resources short, and a lot of those resources we pulled from around the country, which unfortunately affects every major region, and the projects we've got going on now and going forward will be impacted. You know, what we see in the Hawke's Bay will take a number of years to remedy, and the resources, without a doubt, will be coming from the major centres. So that's going to have an impact, and it's going to have how big an impact, I'm not sure, but it will have an impact on our program and what we can and can't deliver. So, yeah, so fortunately we got the work done under emergency, but yeah, I guess the longer term or remediation work, you know, has been slowed down due to essentially external resource.
I will just add on to that, is that's not an uncommon thing for these types of projects, particularly with retaining walls. It's not uncommon for us to put out a tender and just receive one bid. It's not much of a tender if you've only got one person bidding for the job.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Kia ora, thank you. So I've just heard you say that the scope of the policy will take on recommendations or about how we can support private landowners as well if they're encountering slip challenges?
I think what we'll be looking at is we'll be looking at what sort of advice and guidance. And through this event, I'll just say that we learned a lot as well. We learned a lot about how we respond. Given the scale of the event, we learned about what residents actually want to hear from the council and the sort of updates that they need to feel comfortable that we're on top of stuff. And so we've started to make some of those changes. You'd see the new slips page up on the website with a bunch of information there for residents. What we'll be looking at with the policy review is bringing back more of that. These are the things that we think residents would benefit from in terms of advice and guidance that we hold within the council that we could then release to residents proactively so that they're aware of things.
And just within that, can we include like a broader view of what other councils are doing and take on board Mr. Foot's recommendations?
We can definitely look at other councils. One of the things we did when we were in the middle of it and the heat of it was look at our neighboring councils within the region and understand what they have on their web pages, and that kind of was the genesis of us putting up our slips page.
Cool. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. This may not be a question precisely for you, it may be more for Andrea, but I was very concerned when I read in paragraphs 42 and 43 that we'd identified critical work that was necessary around critical routes around Wellington, and then Waka Kotahi refused to fund half of the work. And I would really like to know more about what share of the cost of the slip remediation work we carry versus Waka Kotahi. So I think I'd really like to have clarity around that, and I would like to know any situations where we don't get at least 50% funding, if not more, out of the government agency.
I can answer that one, Councillor. So when Waka Kotahi did their deliberations through the long-term plan, a lot of the prioritization around the different bids for funding was based on the GPS. The GPS of the last 3 years hasn't had resilience in the GPS, and so resilience-funded projects were kind of ranked really low through the prioritization exercise. That's why our funding wasn't granted through that process. In terms of general slip remediation work, through the work that we've got now, the funding that we've got to address these major slip sites, Waka Kotahi does fund 51% of that and does contribute 51% of those jobs.
So they'll fund where we actually have a slip. But what are they funding areas where we feel like there is remediation or there's preventative work required?
They're funding some of it. So they're funding the key emergency routes were areas where we had identified that, in particular, where we'd identified that walls didn't need renewal, but they needed strengthening. So where there were existing walls that didn't need to be renewed, but they needed to be strengthened for events such as this, and that was what they chose not to fund. The areas where we had unsupported slopes, and we said we need to put new walls up there, they did choose to fund those.
This is more of a question for Tori, I guess.
No, you're not asking. You can't ask her.
But can we do something about that? I mean, honestly, I think that's completely unacceptable, and I think we should be really pushing back on any situation where they won't fund.
Yeah, definitely bring that up in debate. Thank you, Tim. Councillor Brown. Thanks. Councillor Randall. Yep, you're on the list, Councillor Free.
Yes, thank you for that. I too feel for the family. I just wanted to understand in terms of the learnings, because we've got a new district plan and an urban planning statement that requires, that permits as up to three housing units on any property in the city. And I was thinking, looking at that could easily have been 3 units. That could have been 3 families that were affected the same way, because So in terms of the learnings from all this hazard side of things, is that going to be fed into the proposed district plan? As it goes through its hearings and things like that. I want to know if that was that feedback.
I don't think Brad or Brian could answer that question. That's really a question for the district plan team. And I saw Sean pop in and out, so if he pops back in, he might be able to answer that.
Okay, Pauiwi,
Yeah, my question is just around clarification. You talked about the GPS resilience rating. Are you talking about the mapping that's supported by those aerial photos that they take?
No, so the GPS I was referring to was the government policy statement. So the government produces every 3 years a policy statement in terms of these are the strategic priorities that we want Waka Kotahi and local authorities to focus on. And the 5 strategic priorities that came out of the last government policy statement, resilience wasn't a strategic priority on that.
I'm talking about the GPS, so where do you get that from then? That mapping? Oh,
a government policy statement. Yeah.
right.
Kapai. And Councillor Free.
Yeah, so I'm just sort of on the same topic, but maybe framing the question a bit better. Will your review address the boundary issues between private land and council land? Because I had a case where someone was going to have to put a retaining wall by necessity on council land, was then going to be charged an ongoing encroachment licence for trying to fix something which I actually thought should have been partly council's problem in the first place.
That will definitely be part of it. There are definitely issues where boundaries and the benefits associated with the particular infrastructure that's going in is governed by policy, and that'll be part of the policy review in terms of how we do that and how we look at that.
Thank you.
Cool.
I also think it's important to note that our current policy is that we protect council public assets, so we don't protect private property.
Yes, but this was actually an extra penalty for the person for just trying to fix something that was kind of caused by a slip on council land affecting her private property.
Cool. Okay, we can explore that in debate. So now I'm going to ask Councillor McNulty to move the paper.
Thanks, Chair. Can't say it brings pleasure to introduce this paper, wrong choice of words, but it is I'm conscious of just how important it is. What's detailed here is the new normal of climate change. July, August 2020, 170 slips, then 373 a year later, and 1,143 in 2022, and nature is only just getting started. So whilst we got off comparatively light to the devastation we've seen in Auckland, Tairāwhiti and Hawke's Bay this year, we can't be complacent in our efforts to fight climate change. So I'm glad as a council we've united in our climate change resilience as a shared theme for our long-term plan, and I just wanted to detail a little bit of what I think that looks like to me. To me, it's at our heart, how do we take our limited budget, which we know is not going to be enough to protect all our assets, and spend it as wisely as possible. What can we spend $1 on today so it doesn't cost us $5 in 5 years or $20 in 10 years? And that's so vital because we want to make sure as a council we can still operate our vital community assets like our libraries, our pools, our community centres, and keep them accessible to residents of our city. Climate change has that potential to make our water woes look laughable in comparison and utterly consume our budget, so we do need to invest now, and I think this paper tells the story of what that investment looks like. We heard from Tim Foote this morning about that financial impact of the slips on an individual family, that intense disruption, both physical and emotional. I can speak to my own little slip where our 4K EQC settlement is going to fall short 16,000 of what we need on our property as well. So these climate change impacts are going to go much beyond the financial, and I hope we can take some of Tim's consideration into our decision making as we reach our long-term plan. If there's one thing Wellington has done really well historically, it's kicking the can down the road for future generations to pick up the tab. So I'm hopeful that we can be united as a council in actually taking that head on and doing some work we can be proud of when we leave this chamber at whatever point that is. Kia ora.
And do you have a seconder, or would Councillor Free?
Yeah, I'll reserve my right though.
Cool. Okay. Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, just a few words. Thank you, officers, for bringing this paper. It's been necessary. I think we've all been coming in with questions from different angles, and it's really important that we get a full overview. I think there's no doubt we are all deeply grieved by what's been happening around our nation, and we know that we've had a few light touches, but we've probably got more to come. And so understanding what's ahead is really critical going forward. So looking forward to the policy review and looking forward to seeing that resilience in the long-term plan budget line. But I do just want to acknowledge Mr. Foote or Tim today for coming in. It's very hard to bring a personal story, but I think no one can tell it like someone who's going through it. And I really do think it would be great to see council, we are the first port of call for people when they are in that position of saying, what do I do? So I really like to see that we can have an outline on how we can help people go through this process, because it isn't clear for them. And if there is any way that we can support, particularly around clarity on process around land and whose land, that would be really important as well. So I'll be looking out in the policy to see that we've taken on the feedback we've had today. Kia ora.
Councillor Pennant.
Thank you, and obviously useful speeches. This is a deeply serious situation, and what's interesting, of course, is the Labour government have cut work on climate change, and Mr. Foote has perfectly explained how actually climate change is a cost of living issue as well. If your house is in negative equity, you are in a very bad situation. Councillor McNulty, I'll just correct you a little bit. We have been waiting for a long time for this GNS work, literally many years, and it is a complicated piece of work, and now we are taking action. So I think it's possibly a little bit unfair to say that we've kicked everything down the road. We just needed the scientific work to hopefully now make good policy. But, if we're talking about good policy, well, that's exactly what this country hasn't done. We have a planning system where you have the RMA and then you have the Building Act, and the two do not talk to each other particularly well. And then so we make plans. Here's your housing, here's all your development, and then you mop up all the problems afterwards, and it's fundamentally flawed, and the RMA reform will not fix that particular problem. I'll just note too the devastation that Turkey is now facing. Not only do they have a major earthquake on their hands, but they've got flooding. So the particular hell of earthquakes and climate change coming together is going to have massive, massive implications for our country, and it's devastating. I am really glad that officers are being blunt about the funding implications. Definitely will be putting up my hand for spending money in this space. It's absolutely critical. And we have made many, many bad planning decisions. I was reminding Councillor Foon of the problems in the south. Houses literally almost falling off cliffs. That is our future, because we didn't make good decisions. But now we do have a lot more information, and we should make only good ones. And just the last point, look, I think it's really important that we do start to encourage people to get engineers in, if they can afford it, to look at the land. This is why I valiantly resisted the idea that we just build. You don't build. It's really difficult to build in the city. It's really, really, really risky. You have to make really good decisions. So if we can at least encourage people to do that, so you're not just getting your building inspectors to come in and have a look. When you're buying a property, you need an engineer in as well. And hopefully that might actually save you a little bit of money. But I do think, as with earthquake-prone buildings, that council has a big role, and we should be helping people and saying, look, we know in this particular area of the city that we've got huge risk. There's sea level rise, there's ground stability, there's earthquake risk, and you need to be going off and at least being able to provide them with, here are some of the questions to you as a non-expert that you need to ask, because most of us don't know. We're not engineers, we're not planners, so we need sometimes a bit of a guide about the kind of questions to ask. But I hope that just finally that this will lead us to being very, very rigorous about our planning decisions, because I don't feel that's been done, and and it's going to have very serious consequences.
Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you. And like I'm sure all of us around the table, we absolutely empathise with the public participant, and we've seen other properties like that across the city as well, just as equally sad. But I just wonder, we talked about not kicking the can down the road. We're talking about waiting for the long-term plan next year. We've talked, there's been comments about earthquake-prone buildings, which we never really dealt with. We've had a lot of residents having to say how can the council help, and we've never resolved that at this point. And so now we've got another issue around how some of the houses are being built, especially on slopes or against slopes. I'm concerned that I understand there's a big piece of work required for our long-term plan, but I'd really like officers to think about what could change in our annual plan, or where some of the money and some of the jam jars could be moved from one area to another to actually focus a bit more on resilience, because climate change there's not only mitigation, but there's also is also about how do you adapt to it, and how can we help the people who invested in the city stay in the city. And so I think there's work to be done as part of our annual plan budget, because that kicks in on the 1st of July. Even if we can improve how we communicate some of this information, we may not be able to change it at the moment, but if we can certainly find better ways of communicating and engaging, and perhaps moving some resources around because there is a limited budget, and we've got to work within the financial parameters that the city has. So we're going to have to reprioritise, but I think we've got to do some reprioritisation before this financial year's out, rather than waiting for another 12 months or so. And so, and I think we've got to be open to having those conversations. We've seen the Prime Minister doing that. It's saying we actually have to reprioritise. We have to take the money to fix what's happened up north. Roads. There's no roads left. They have to be rebuilt. So I think we've got to take look at that as well and see what we can do now, not in 12 months' time. Thank you.
Councillor Free.
Yeah, I'm very, very grateful to the staff for listening, and to some of our concerns, probably all of our concerns, and probably your own concerns, and bringing us this paper. It's really good to see it. This has been a major worry for me. It was probably one of the biggest concerns for me in this triennium, is that we actually put aside enough money to look after our city, and that goes to the slips, it goes to the way the city's cared for and presented, it goes to making sure that we've got our own buildings up to scratch, lots of things. And I wonder if in fact we've been too ambitious about our growth agenda, and we haven't been cautious enough about actually protecting what we've got. I share a lot of the concerns that have been expressed by Councillor Pannett and Councillor Calvert and others. There are some very real questions about how the city's going to grow while we protect the existing homes against these very real risks and threats, which we've never experienced in the degree which they're obviously coming to us. It's also connected with our spend on water, because while we're losing 40% of water as leaks, those leaks have the potential to undermine the stability of our land. And I've experienced this myself with a slip in Island Bay that was caused by a neighbour up the hill having a faulty stormwater system. And so our land slipped. And luckily we were in a position where the EQC payout almost covered it. So we didn't have the terrible situation that people are facing. But I live in a steep site myself. So I'm very aware of the potential for land to slip. And what's bothering me about the whole thing about our water situation is how much control we're actually not going to have over fixing things that need to be fixed. I think, this is a huge piece of work and an incredibly important piece of work. I know we're just at the start of this, and I hope that we don't face the sort of things that other parts of New Zealand have faced, but we probably will.
Right of reply, Councillor McNulty.
I'll just thank the officers very quickly for the comprehensive report. This has been really fascinating and important reading, and I think it's clearly stirred some debate and emotions in all of us, so I want to thank them and happy to move from there.
Oh, and I'll just echo that thanks to Brad and Brian and Siobhan. Thank you. All right, let's vote. Is there anything that anybody wants to take separately, or we can take it together? Cool. Awesome, that is carried. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the Priority Investment Quarterly Report introduced by Siobhan Proctor.
Great. Thanks, Tam. I'll ask Andrew Cowie to come up to the table. Andrew Cowie is our PMO manager, so he will be known to some of the returning councillors, but maybe not to the new councillors. So this is the first priority investment report that we brought to this council. Apologies, it should have come last month as part of the long-term plan finance and performance committee meeting. From now, it will be presented alongside the quarterly reports at that committee. So we've got 17 priority investments. These are a subset of our total projects. We've got over 100 projects running at council at any one time. These represent the most significant in terms of cost complexity and stakeholder impact. So I will open up the floor to questions, take the paper as read. We have a number of business owners, hopefully. We've got a few business owners, so if you've got specific project questions that we can't answer, we can take them away and provide you answers back at a later date.
Cool, any questions? Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. With the obviously, we didn't have this report when we considered the draft annual plan, but given the information that's in here, and you'll be producing another one, how will this information be factored into management's response to finalising the annual plan?
Well, it's factored in as part of the course. So we get this report monthly. It comes to ELT on a monthly basis, and we present it to you quarterly.
Okay. So this is available monthly if we... Okay, thank you.
Councillor Free.
Yeah, I've just got questions about two projects. So one is Evans Base Stage 1, in which we're waiting for some missing sections in the cycle path. And I noted that the design, the engineering for the walls, seawalls, hasn't yet been finalised. Is that the case? And can you, if it is, can you outline what the timeframe might be for getting a really firm design plan in place and getting this project completed?
I can answer that. So yes, so the design for the seawalls was completed, but it's been questioned under building consent. And so we're doing a little bit more work just to get the consenting team happy around the design. And once the consenting team is happy around the design, then we should be able to go. That doesn't have an impact on the rest of the work, though. So we're still planning to start the construction for the rest of the work. And the seawall was always a separable portion that we had as a separate part of the project. So we still plan on starting the construction around the rest of the work.
And when was that planned to start?
At this stage, we're anticipating that we'll start construction around April.
Okay, thank you. And my second question was really around the sludge treatment plant, and we've already seen quite an increase in the projected cost for that. How would you describe the risk of a further cost escalation?
I can answer that. So what we presented to you in December was a P50 and a P80, so that's basically the envelope of costs. So the risk of going between P80 and P100 is there, of course, but we're doing everything in our control to be able to manage that risk through our contract negotiations with the main contract.
And is there any chance Stuart Duff Drive will have to close during the construction? Is that, have we got to that kind of level of detail about?
No, it shouldn't have to. The laydown area is not going to interrupt traffic flow.
Okay.
Councillor Pennant.
Thanks for this report. It's really helpful, and I appreciate your honesty, because the first question is, you talk about problems relating to scope creep, lack of task prioritisation and poor communication. Now, actually, we as governors have a role here too. What are we learning from all this as we go forward with the project management office? Are we really trying to deal with those kinds of issues?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So to answer that question, the number one, you may well have heard the radio interview earlier this week at government, where the new reporting system police has suddenly generates a whole bunch of troubles and challenges because people are reporting more, and we're seeing that right now with the introduction of Paiaka. So Paiaka is the new tool that councillors brought in, CMS project, that we are moving people from an Excel-based workbook onto that, and as part of that transfer, my team are working with each of the project managers and validating and checking those risks as they put them in. They start to show up a whole bunch more than what they used to. So we're moving away from the traditional, people just writing things down to actually now having in one place. So hence, as a result of that, we now see scope, which is one of the three. You would have seen the pre-question, so you know where that is. Scope is the one that we capture all those challenges in. So the short answer, better reporting is showing up where our gaps are, and we're moving towards that. In respect to what governance can do to assist us as management, at the moment we have a set of delegations and we operate to those, and we will be able to, in another 2 months, be far better on our forecasting, so we know when to come to governance to seek a change in delegation or to bring something to you because of that. So I expect by the start of the new financial year in June that we'll be at a point where it's very, very clear where those things fall.
Good. Okay, and one of my favourite topics, managing risks around the cost of earthquake-prone buildings. Our poor residents have this problem all the time. What are you doing about that? Because we know that sometimes you get one engineering report and then you get another engineering report, and it becomes very complicated.
I'll answer that. I think that's outside of the scope of this report.
Well, but you're mentioning projects and earthquake strengthening, so I would have thought that was relevant to ask about how you're managing costs.
So on specific projects?
Yeah, like the bond, the town hall. That's why.
So in terms of the town hall and Te Matapihi?
And the museum,
which isn't on there yet.
Okay, but it's going to be.
Yeah, it will be eventually. But I mean, it's a standard way we would manage cost. You know, we have a QS come in. They tend to be on the project management team. We cost out the risk, and then we manage to that cost profile.
I'll leave it for
Councillor Randall. Oh, okay, cool. All right, that brings us to the end of Councillor Brown.
This was probably more of a explain the format. So one of the areas which I was curious about was it was the convention centre one. So just page 17 of the report. And this is probably helping me because being a newbie here. But so the original budget of a 157.8, we have an approved budget of 163.15, and is that because of the chief executive discretion, or did council ORs actually vote on the additional money? And so am I right?
You voted on the additional money in the quarterly review meeting.
Okay, so the original, just so I'm understanding this, so the original cost was 157. We voted an additional 6, and then it went slightly over budget to the current estimate of 169. So that's the sort of the sequence of things. And just to sort of, to then go back to the playground one, because I was curious about that, because that seemed to have an original budget of 2.5, and now we're looking at 9 or something or other. So what happened? So was the original budget, did the original council decision in terms of the playground, was it actually $2.5 million? And did we end up with this $9 million cost based on it? I mean, how did that happen?
Have we got the business owner here? No, I don't think we can answer that, but we can take that offline. I can get back to you.
Yeah, sure. I didn't want to block that.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. I'm going to invite Councillor Matthews to introduce to move the paper. Sorry.
Kia ora, colleagues. Just very briefly, for new councillors, it's worth noting that this kind of reporting was something we introduced in the last term, and it was because we had major projects which we might only hear about once a year, or even less frequently than that. So this bringing together in this way and giving us regular updates on all of those important pieces of work is, very useful, and I think we've continued to kind of improve the way that we do that. So I'd like to thank everybody that had input into this report. I look forward to those coming to my committee next time, and I guess also there was a good background to many of the kind of issues about the way we do this work in Audit and Risk Committee, and so that is useful if you weren't able to be at that committee. Have a look at the YouTube. It was very kind of beneficial to see the way that council is changing the way we work in this space and how much progress has been made on those things. So obviously there's a lot happening still, under difficult circumstances at times. And just thank you to all involved, and, good to see the progress that we are making on these major pieces of work.
Cool, thank you. And who would like to second that paper? Councillor O'Neill, would you like to speak? You good? Would anybody like to debate? Councillor Pennant. You go first, Councillor Pennant.
Yeah, look, so I do appreciate when officers come back and identify issues honestly. I think that's really important, and I think it would be good, possibly you through the chair, Mayor Whānau, if we could talk about this at our planning day, about what we do as governors to support good project planning, and we don't add to some of the challenges that are being faced there. But I guess, yeah, look, it is a bit of a worry, and that how we often, it's partly the project planning process. We get a cost and then we're often being asked for more money, and I think there is still some work to do there, improving that process and sizing the jobs properly so that we're not constantly being asked for money. I did ask a genuine question about around managing costs around earthquake-prone buildings. This is an enormous problem. The costs just do keep going up and up and up. And that has really significant implications in the private sector, but also for us as well. And I guess I just, we are doing some work around earthquake-prone buildings, and I look forward to hearing about how we're going to manage that, because we have over 500 buildings in the city which are earthquake-prone, which are not going to be strengthened by 2027, half of them. This is just not going to happen. So I think there does need to be some quite deep thinking, and just sort of saying, well, we can just manage it within quite conventional processes, for me, isn't quite enough of an answer to satisfy my concerns. So that will be a conversation for another time, but I think we need to keep our eye closely on that. Kia ora.
Councillor Randall.
Yes, so I'm very pleased to have this report. I think it's a big step forward in terms of the council not only getting a handle on managing its projects more systematically and more broadly, but also letting us know about that. One of the things when you do improvement reporting is the first thing you see are the big things you were missing. It is no surprise at all that we more clearly see some of the gaps, and that's why some of the questions came forward. We're in a better place. Okay, just to remind people, we're in a better place now that we have this sort of framework and this sort of approach to improve the maturity of our managing of our large projects. And I'm very pleased for that, and I commend the officers for the work they're doing forward, because, you know, it's really difficult to have these questions fired at you. I think this is a process step, and this is the first report, and we will give some feedback. I mean, I've already asked for this report to come in a slightly different format, and because it makes it easier to get a more of an overview of the whole thing. I think we need a little bit more of a tool towards looking at the projects all together and separately at the same time. But this is a work in progress. Okay, so I think that the office is great. I really support the work on the project management methodology along with the asset management methodology. It means that the important stuff will float up to see us, but also we'll get more forewarning, you know, rather than every year something being surprised. It's very difficult for us to deal with surprises. It's even harder for the public to understand why all of a sudden something's come up. And so this gives us essentially a speedometer on our big spend, and that, I mean, as a person who's a detailed person, I'd like it every month, but every 3 months I can understand at a governance level is appropriate. So I just say thanks very much, and I, you know, support this. Thanks.
Right of reply. Oh, good. Cool. Okay, so we'll put that one to the vote. Thanks, everybody. Yay. Cool. And that's carried unanimously. All right, so now I'm going to invite Jennifer Parker up to introduce the Environment and Infrastructure Hearings panel to us.
Chair, kia ora tātou. So this is a simple paper that we're suggesting that to help manage your workload and the amount of consultations we have coming up, a hearings panel is a suggested method for doing that. Happy to answer any questions that you've got. You'll be familiar, most of you, from last triennium where we used a similar process. It just helps us be more accessible to the community in terms of the timing of those, the way that they're organised, and also manages councillor workloads. Thanks.
Questions? Councillor Pennant, you can ask a question.
Sorry, just quickly, it just occurred to me. I mean, how many days are you anticipating of hearings?
So we're looking at, there seems to be about 5 consultations that we can see at the minute that may require more time than you would be able to give during public participation, essentially, in a committee meeting. How many will depend on, obviously the response from the community within those, but they all seem to be ones that, to me, you'd be wanting at least one more committee meeting potentially to manage those.
Cool. That looks like all the questions. Thank you, Jennifer. Going to invite Councillor Brown to move the paper.
I'm happy to move the paper, even though I personally wanted to move it by also inserting the requirement that the chair got paid extra, but it was flatly turned down, so I'll just move the paper as it is.
Nice try. Yeah, I'll second it. I don't need to speak. Would anyone like to debate? Councillor Calvert.
I'm really concerned that the panel's been set, the quorum's been set at 3. And I actually don't know how, out of a council of 18, that we think a 6 is acceptable. So I know the person moving this, but this is extraordinarily low. I haven't seen any other panel or committee with only with a number of 3. For the nature of these things. So I just wondered whether you might want to take a wee break and just have to think about that on the fly.
Liz. And this is debate. So this is your speaking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can I just say in answer to that statement?
Yeah.
I recently participated in the alcohol reforms for the select committee, and they only had 3, and that was for the whole of New Zealand. So I don't have a problem with what's been suggested, personally.
Councillor Matthews. Thank you. Pauwi Willis.
I guess just, while that may be the quorum, I just want to note as one of the councillors who's nominated for this hearings panel, I intend to be there, right through the hearings. So, and I'm sure that's the intention of everybody who's appointed to do so.
Deputy Mayor.
Just to echo Councillor Matthews, many of these consultations are around our zero waste strategy and our regional waste strategy, so I intend on being definitely at all of those.
Cool. Councillor Brown, do you want a right of reply? Cupite. Let's vote. Would anyone like to take anything separately? No? Okay, we'll take it all together.
So is it all together?
No, so we'll take 5 separately. Or is it, I'm not... everything except 5. Oh, everything except 5, cool. Cool. And then we'll take 5 separately, which is the quorum for this panel. Cool, that is carried. And now we're going to move on to actions tracking. So I'll invite Siobhan Proctor to introduce.
Happy to introduce the actions tracking paper and take it as read.
Questions?
Questions?
Councillor Pennant.
Thank you for that. The e-bike trial, can I just ask about that, or whether appropriate forum is to do that? Because I'm really concerned about these very large structures being on our footpaths.
Can I ask Moana to come up and answer that one?
And I guess the question is, can we actually make it mandatory to put it back? Because I just don't think we should be littering our footpaths with bikes.
We make it mandatory to put what back, sir?
The bikes back, they're really big. I mean, of course I like them, but they're really cluttering up.
So look, we've provided the drop zones. This is a trial, so we are seeing how it goes. We've had a low number of complaints. We can provide you with that information so far. So we're not getting a lot of complaints from the general public about it. We have been really clear with the providers that we want them to use the drop zones, and we don't want them littering the footpaths, but we haven't had a lot of issue so far.
That's maybe just because it's not
in terms of making it mandatory, I don't think we can make it mandatory that people can't leave something somewhere on a footpath. But because of the relationship that we have with the providers, and because they're going to want to be successful when we go out to tender for the contract, they are monitoring this very closely.
And have you engaged with, as part of the trial, will you engage with the disability community on that?
My understanding is yes, I can get you more information.
Yeah, okay. Well,
but ultimately, it's up to you guys to decide whether or not we go ahead with it. That's why we're doing the trial.
Right. Well, add me to the list of complainants. And the other question, Siobhan, I just had was around daylighting of streams, which we've been talking about for ages. I'm just wondering what would be the best process if we did want to put something in the LTP about that?
So
you have to decide which one.
Yeah, I suggest it needs to be
Q&A session next week on the LTP. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Q&A session next week on LTP.
Okay.
So raise it there.
So we could do it then. Lovely. Thank you.
Cool. Great. Okay. Councillor Brown. Yeah. Councillor Brown's asking one first, and then you can ask a question.
Oh, sorry. So are we allowed to ask specific questions about individual projects that are on the list?
Yep.
So I had two questions. One is about the Evans Bay Parade. Whereabouts are we at the moment? Because I'd like to see that progress to ASAP, but I was a bit confused. Oh, sorry.
So you can ask questions about the actions that have been resolved to be followed up, but you can't just ask any question about any project kind of blah. Yeah, so it's got to be an action that we've agreed to as a council, and that's what this paper is about, is tracking where that's at.
At 144. I was just, where are we at?
Kicking off in April.
Okay, and then my second question is about 15...
What page?
156, sorry, question number 156.
Page.
Oh, which number?
Page 65. 156, housing strategy and proactive development.
Got the number, action number, which is on the...
156.
156, okay, got it. Okay.
There's a paper scheduled for early September. Was it actually delivered?
Yep, September 22.
Okay, so if I want...
I will, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that.
Councillor Calvert.
Are we asking questions of both papers? Or just,
No, I'm
just
taking
the
them
actions?
separately.
Okay.
Yeah. So do you want to wait to the full programme?
Just the actions tracking. I just wondered whether, just in terms of presentation of the information, whether it would be possible for us just to see the ones not completed first and then all the ones completed at the end. It would just make it easier to digest the information.
Okay. Jennifer, is that something that we can consider, whether we have in the actions tracking how we've got the status of the project, if they could be sorted based on not completed to completed?
Rather than by date or by number order?
Yeah, I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, the only thing is just in terms of finding them, having them in number order seems quite handy, just listening to the question that was asked by the councillor then. I mean, it's really just around workability. That's the thinking behind it, is if we have a number order, then if somebody says 156, we can all find it. But if you'd like it another way, we can try and draw that information in another order.
I wonder whether they can provide it in as a separate document, maybe even as a spreadsheet that we can interrogate
manually, yeah.
and then we can sort to what suits us best.
as in
So this is a committee paper, so it would usually be delivered. You know, we have to just decide how it would be delivered. I could perhaps talk to the Deputy Mayor and we could work through this.
Yeah, if you could.
Together, but we can't provide every format within the agenda, otherwise it would be a very large agenda.
There's so much data there, and just to make it the readability of it, I wonder whether you could then look, would you be prepared to go and look at how we can present some of this information to help us?
Yep, I can work with the Deputy Mayor on that.
And then the other thing I just would also like to ask officers, a number of them have just got completed, but I know there's been other slightly different actions. So I wonder whether officers could look at those ones that have just got completed with no notes in the side, whether there should be anything else added to the comments section. And I can talk offline about some of those.
Cool. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to move that actions tracking paper, seconded by Councillor Brown. Let's vote. Okay, now we're going to move on to the forward program. I'll invite Siobhan Proctor to introduce that paper.
Okay, happy to introduce forward program. Take it as read. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 papers coming next month, and note there isn't a Environment and Infrastructure Committee plan for May.
Councillor Calvert with a question.
Yes, I do. In terms of officers coming back next month on the speed management plan, and given government's recent announcements around their focus, is that something that would be factored in?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just waiting to see what the final outcome of that's going to be. They've indicated they're going to change their plans on the state highways. Whether that then extends to local roads, we just need to get clarification on that.
Cool. I'm going to move the paper. Councillor Brown's going to second. Any debate? Great. Let's vote. Yep. So Councillor Calvert is voting yes, but she's voting no. Yeah, you have a go at it too. Yeah, it worked. Cool. Maybe we need a backup yes button. Great. Cool. All right, carried. Now we're going to conclude with a karakia. Okay. Unuhia, 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 ki te uru unui. Kia wātia, kia māma, te ngā, tinana, te wairua. Koia, whakairia a ki ki runga. Kia wātia, aira, kua wātia. Thanks, everybody.